Alright, let me show you how I color graded the Action 5 Pro clips you just saw inside DaVinci Resolve. To make it a bit easier and more interesting as well, I downloaded some reference frames from movies online because I feel like it's going to be a bit more fun in a way. For this shot, I got this frame from the movie Speak No Evil, and I think the color grade from this frame is going to match very well my frame in here because the lighting is more or less the same, and also the colors are very similar. We have a lot of green in here with some reds and oranges, and the same thing is happening in here, a lot of greens and also reds and oranges. And the reference frame I chose for the second shot is this one from the movie Hunger Games, which I highly recommend to watch. I think the color grade from here is going to work very well with my shot because again the lighting is very similar and also the environment is more or less the same. We have mountains and a lot of, you know, green and yellow trees basically. So let's go to the first clip and start color grading. First thing I'm going to do is go to my node trees in here and apply my Rec. 709 node tree. I have a link down below for this node tree if you are interested, or you can just pause the video and take a screenshot of the nodes that I have in here and replicate basically the same structure in your workflow. So first thing I have in here is an input device transform, then an output device transform. I'm going from Rec. 709 to DaVinci Wide Gamut Intermediate, and from DaVinci Wide Gamut Intermediate back to Rec. 709 Type A because I'm using a Mac display. And the reason I chose Rec. 709 is because D-Log-M is a Rec. 709 profile with less contrast and less saturation. It's not a true log profile like D-Log. And the reason why I'm using DaVinci Wide Gamut Intermediate is because this is the widest color space available within DaVinci Resolve, which is going to give you the best results when it comes to adjusting the colors, saturation, contrast, and exposure. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do in here is increase the saturation with this saturation node in here. I've set the color space of this node to HSV and the channels are disabled channels 1 and 3 to get the most natural looking saturation. The way I use it is by going to the color wheels and just, you know, increasing the gamma to add more saturation and also increasing the gain if I want even more saturation. But in this case, I'm going to desaturate with the gain and increase the saturation with the gamma, which is going to increase the saturation to the least saturated parts of the frame, which is basically what I want. So I'm gonna put it about here, and something like this looks good to me. Before and after, before and after. All right, next, I feel like I'm going to increase the contrast a bit because this shot in here is quite contrasty compared to my shot. So I'm gonna go to my contrast node in here, use the color wheels primaries in here, decrease the gamma, slightly increase the gain, and slightly decrease the lift to add more contrast to the black parts of the frame. Here is how it compares to the reference frame. All right, next thing I'm going to do is create some power windows and target specific areas in the frame. First of all, I don't like how everything behind my subject in here is too bright compared to my subject, which is quite darker. So to fix that, I'm gonna select Power Window 1 node in here, go to my Power Window, select the pen tool in here to create a costume mask, and I'm going to create a mask in the top area of the frame. I'm going to increase the softness in here. And now instead of going to the primaries and decreasing the gamma, for example, to lower the exposure in here, I'm not going to do that because it's going to affect also my subject. What I'm going to do instead is select my qualifier and only qualify the brightest parts in this selection in here. So in the qualifier, I'm going to select luminance, click Shift H to see what I am qualifying, increase the softness in the low part and go up until I'm only selecting the brightest parts in here without affecting the skin tones of the subject. So let's go up, 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 more and more until I'm not seeing anything when it comes to skin tones. Which is something, let me see, about here, like 66 looks good to me. I'm gonna disable this, go to my primaries and just, you know, readjust the exposure. And now, because I've qualified everything, I'm only affecting the brightest parts of the frame here. So let me see, going down here, also with this one, something like that. This is the before and after, before and after looks much better in my opinion. Also, I feel like the exposure on this structure in here is a bit too bright. So I'm gonna use power window number 2 in here, create a selection around this structure. Something like this. And I'm going to track this, increase the softness, and reduce the exposure slightly until it's more or less the same as my subject. Because before it was a bit too distracting. Something like this looks good to me. Let's see. Before and after, before and after. Also, I feel like my subject is a bit too dark still. So I'm going to mask it out and brighten everything up with my subject and darken everything else. To do that, I'm going to select power window 3, and I think I'm going to use the magic mask for this because it's going to be the easiest way to qualify my subject. I'm going to click this to see what I'm qualifying, what I'm selecting, select my subject, select better to have a better selection, and start tracking. All right, now I'm going to increase my blur radius to increase the fade, increase the denoise in here as well. Check this, and now I'm gonna come back to my color wheels, increase the exposure on my subject just a bit, not too much, and then I'm gonna go to 3 out, which is everything outside of the selection I just made, basically everything outside of the mask I just made. Select this node in here and basically reduce the exposure. As you can see, it's going to affect only everything outside of my subject, more or less at least. So let me slightly reduce the exposure, not too much. I don't want it to look too fake. I want it to look as natural as possible. Something like this, before and after, before and after. Maybe I can slightly reduce the gamma in here to bring back some contrast on my subject. Let's do before and after. There's still a huge difference. Let me zoom in. Before and after, before and after. Looks much better in my opinion. All right, I feel like there's also a bit too much red in here, especially on my subject. So to remove that, I'm gonna use my balance node in here, which I've set its gamma to linear to have a bit more precise adjustment when it comes to pushing around the colors. And with the gain wheel, I'm going to slightly remove the red tint on my subject, which is probably created by the ND filters I've used with the camera. And also maybe I'm going to add a touch of yellow to the shot. Something like that. This is the before and after, before and after. I feel like now it's a bit more balanced. So let me see how it compares to the other shot. Mine is definitely a bit more saturated and brighter, and also I need to add more of these, warm reddish hues to my shot. So maybe I'm going to slightly decrease the exposure with the gain wheel and increase the contrast with the gamma. Something like this looks fantastic, I think. And next I'm going to add a bit of a stylized look to this shot. So first of all, I'm gonna use this Dehancer node in here. Go to the effects menu in here, decrease the contrast to about 9, maybe even like 5. All right, it looks more or less the same. I'm gonna select a different film stock, maybe like 500T, no, 50D. Yeah, 50D looks good. Play around with this. I want it to be a bit warmer, so I'm going to leave it at +2. Then I'm going to go to my print film, select Kodak 2383 and warm it up even more, just to push in these warm hues in the frame, and already it looks much similar. However, to make it even better, I'm going to go to this node, which is for the Film Look Creator, which is free if you are using the studio version of Resolve. When I enable this, disable Film Look Blend because I already have a film look with Dehancer. I'm going to increase the bleach bypass just slightly here, like 0.1, let's do. And now I'm going to play around with the split tone to introduce these reddish warm hues to my shot. So first thing I'm going to do here is increase the amount to 100%, push the pivot to the side, select a hue that I like, that looks somewhat similar to the reference frame. Of course, now it's too much, but we're going to make it less strong. I feel like something like 28 looks good. It's like orangey and red. Okay, and now I'm going to decrease the amount to about 0.15. And I'm going to play with the pivot to balance everything out, because as of now, it's a bit too red everywhere. So I'm going to play with the pivot, which is going to introduce the opposite color that I just selected, which is going to be probably like teal or blue, as you can see. That's what split tone is. It's basically two opposite colors to each other. So let me again open a side-by-side view here, something like that, and then play around with the pivot until it's more or less the same as the reference frame. Okay, like this, 0.185. Because I'm OCD with this stuff, with these numbers. And honestly, it looks very similar. Later on, I can always come back to it and readjust it if necessary. However, the hues are quite different in my frame, especially the blues. So what I'm gonna do is go to this hue node in here, go to my color slice page, and just play around with the blues until they look more or less as in this frame, which are quite desaturated compared to my frame in here. So let me go to the hue, desaturate the cyan here to make it more like neutral basically, and desaturate the blues. But you know what, I'm not gonna go too much because this is action camera footage. You have to be careful how much you push it around, otherwise you're gonna see some artifacts. And just to be safe, actually, let me preview this. Okay, everything still looks good. Let me go extreme, like completely desaturate everything and see how it looks. Yeah, it still holds up, actually. I mean, DJI has done a fantastic job with this camera. I mean, I can see some artifacts in here if I'm really pixel peeping. Like, you can see this in here. I mean, maybe on YouTube you can't really see it, but I can definitely see some, like, squarish artifacts in here. So I'm gonna go back with this to about 0.6 and also go back with this until I no longer see artifacts. Yeah, this is kind of okay. Let me actually increase it a bit more. Maybe I'm also going to increase more the density. Something like that. Let me see how it looks. Yeah, it looks fine compared to the other reference frame. I mean, it's not the same, but because in here I don't really have clouds, I guess it was filmed on a hazy day or something. And in my shot, you clearly can see clouds in the background. So it's kind of hard to recreate this, especially with an action camera footage, but I'm trying to do my best in here. Actually, maybe I'm gonna, shift the colors around. See what I can do here. Make it a bit different than like blue. See how it looks. Yeah, I will leave it in here. Next, I think I'm gonna play around with the yellow colors. My yellows are a bit more saturated than what's in the frame. So I'm going to, again, select this hue node in here and just desaturate the yellows a bit, not too much. Like 0.85, something like that. And also increase the density. I love playing with this slider in here, makes everything look much better. Now we are much closer. And also I feel like the greens on my shot are way too green compared to the reference frame. So what I'm gonna do is select this green in here and warm it up. Let's push it towards like red, orange, not too much of course, but I wanna make it look more yellow than green. So again, I'm gonna play around with the density a little bit, and maybe slightly desaturate this by like 0.5 points. And already, honestly, like I'm super close. Actually, you know what? I feel like I need more green in the yellows. Like if I zoom in here, this is more green than mine here. Mine is a bit too yellow. So let me see if we can put it more towards green. Like let's do -2.5. And then let me see. Just play around with this until it somewhat looks like in the frame. No, it's a bit too green. Let me just introduce back some yellow. Let's go to about here, do a before and after. Let me see on like a full screen. Yeah, it's like very similar. Maybe the reference frame is a bit, a bit more reddish and warmer. So I'm going to increase this to like 0.2 in the film creator and maybe slightly push it towards like green yellow. That's like 33. And yeah, now, wow, now it looks much better. I like how the skin tones on the Action 5 Pro look. Like it's so beautiful and natural looking. Now as a final touch, I feel like, let me see them side by side actually. Yeah, maybe I can slightly decrease the highlights. I'm gonna use this trim node for that and go to the curves, select only the Y, which stands for luminance, and then I'm gonna open editable splines and just drag the highlights slightly down to compress the highlights, bring up the shadows to fade in the shadows, and bring back some contrast. And this is the before and after, before and after. I basically just darken the shot even more and increase the contrast even further. So these shots now, actually it's a bit too dark, I think. Let me slightly increase the exposure in the darks a bit more and maybe slightly compress the highlights also at the same time. Something like this, before and after. Let me do a comparison to the other shot, open it in full frame view. Yeah, it's a bit too contrasty, a bit too much contrast. Yeah, this looks much better. Let's do like a before and after in full screen. I mean, a comparison, not a before and after. All right, finally, I feel like I'm going to increase the sharpness a bit by going to this node, sharpen node, and playing around with this here. Just want to increase the sharpness on my subject a bit. 0.48 works just fine. And also just because I see some grain in this shot, especially like here, and also some blooming, I'm gonna use this node to add these effects. And this is also Dehancer, but without any film profile or something like that. It's basically just bloom and grain, nothing else. However, I am going to go to the grain menu in here, select costume and just desaturate everything because I don't like this chroma grain, as you can see in here. Just adds this, you know, magenta, yellow, not yellow, green and blue pixels to the grain, which I don't like. And then this is way too much for this shot. So I'm gonna go down to output and play around with this until I'm somewhat happy. I'm mainly looking at my subject to make sure it looks as best as possible. Yeah, like somewhere around 14, let's say. Looks good. Let's see before and after, before and after. As you can see, it adds a bit more bloom in the highlights in here and just softens everything up and removes the digital touch that this shot had. Maybe I can increase it a bit more. Let's do like 17. Before and after, before and after. Let's do a comparison. And honestly, I feel like this is as close as I can get with my color grading skills. All right, now let's color grade clip number 2. I'm gonna start by increasing the saturation to somewhere around here. Now I'm going to add some contrast with my contrast node. Don't forget, we are going somewhere around here. This is the reference frame. Quite contrasty and desaturated at the same time. So I'm going to increase the contrast in my shot. Slightly decrease the exposure as well because the reference frame here is quite dark. I feel like this is somewhat okay when it comes to exposure and contrast. Next, I'm going to fix the white balance. It's a bit too red and also too blue at the same time. Something like this looks good to me. Before and after, before and after. As you can see, just cleans up everything in here. Before and after, before and after. All right, next I'm going to add a window in here because I feel like this area is a bit too bright. So let me select power window 1, select the pen tool and add a costume mask in here. And now I'm going to increase the softness to something like this, quite heavy. Go to my primaries and just reduce the gain slightly to make this upper part of the frame look a bit more balanced. This is the before and after, before and after. All right, next, I feel like since this shot is quite desaturated and contrasted at the same time, the easiest way to add this effect is to use the Bleach bypass in Film Look Creator. So let me select Film Look Creator, disable the Film Look blend, I don't need that yet, disable the split tone, and only play around with the Bleach bypass. As you can see, just adds more contrast and makes the shot look a bit more black and white. I feel like somewhere around 0.35 will work fine. Later on, I'm going to, you know, target specific areas in the frame and make it look more like in the reference frame. Maybe just slightly more, like 0.4. Let's see, like this. Yeah. All right, I feel like the next thing I need to do here is to desaturate the blues, because in this frame the blues are quite desaturated, and also they're not quite blue. They're like more like green cyan color, whereas in my shot the blues are like blue. So I'm gonna go to this hue node in here and then select color slice and just, you know, desaturate the blues quite heavily and also the cyans quite heavily. It's affecting the mountains in here, but I am going to fix that a bit later on. Let me open these shots side by side and adjust the hue until it somewhat looks as in the reference frame. Use this, something like that. Maybe add a bit more density to the shot. Okay, I feel like my shot now is very similar to the reference frame in terms of like the sky at least, but I need to add back some saturation to these mountains in here, and the way I'm going to do that is with a power window. I'm going to select power window number 2 and draw a manual mask in here with the pen tool. I'm not sure if this is the best way to do it, but I feel like it's going to work just fine. I'm going to slightly make it smaller in here actually. Only select the mountains, increase the softness just a little bit, not too much, and also the outside just a little bit. I'm gonna go back to my color slice and just bring back some saturation to the mountains in here, because before it was just, you know, black and white basically. Something like this, maybe also the blues. Actually, no, I don't need to touch the blues. Maybe I'm also going to play around with the hue of the mountains, make it a bit more blue. Okay, let's see how it compares. Now it looks very similar, except the yellows. I feel like the yellows in my frame look quite different. So let me put these shots side by side, and as you can see, these are more green and this is more like red yellow. So I'm gonna go to the hue node in here and play around with the yellows in the color slice page. I'm just gonna push it towards green, desaturate everything to about here, increase the density. Just play around with this until it somewhat looks the same as in the reference frame. Maybe the greens too, doesn't really do much. Let me see a side by side. Wow, now it looks very similar, I feel like. Maybe I can also play around with these colors in here, which are probably the oranges. It's a bit too saturated. It's probably going to also affect my skin tones, but honestly, I don't really care. In this case, it looks good to me. Maybe slightly decrease the contrast, the exposure. Gonna compress this shot with this trim node in here by just, bringing it down to about here. And then bringing this up slightly. Bringing back the contrast and just play around with this until it looks somewhat okay. Let me compare these two. Wow, they look very similar in my opinion, these shots. And also I feel like I'm going to increase the sharpness in this shot as well to like 0.48 just to make it a bit sharper. And maybe because there's also some grain I can see in here and some bloom a little bit, I'm going to do the same thing as I did with the other clip by going to this Dehancer node in here and then going to the film grain, removing the chroma completely, and then just, playing with output until it somewhat looks natural, which I think is somewhere, let's see, let's do like 13, and this is the before and after. Let me see again how it compares to the shot. It's super close, probably as close as I can get with my color grading skills. Alright, I hope you enjoyed this video and found it to be informative. I'm actually quite impressed by how much you can push D-Log-M footage from the Action 5 Pro. I mean, the people who shot the movies that I took the reference shots from, they used a cinema camera probably to get the shots. And I'm just using a little tiny action camera. So that's a huge difference. And as you saw, if you have the skills in post-production and you know how to properly expose and white balance your shots in camera, you can get fantastic results even from a tiny action camera like the Action 5 Pro. If you want to learn more about how to get the best results from the Action 5 Pro or Action 4, watch my DJI Action playlist. I have a bunch of videos showing how to properly expose your footage, white balance your footage, and so on. If you want to get the same Note 3 that I have for DaVinci Resolve, check it out down below. And also I have lots for the Action 5 Pro, Action 4, and Pocket 3 down below as well. Anyhow, I guess this is it for today. Thank you for watching, and I guess I'll see you again soon. Bye bye.